So today we're going to be talking a little bit about eye injuries and eye protection. I do want to just highlight here that there are many ways to protect workers from eye injuries. We're not going to go into all aspects of them. We are going to kind of focus a little bit more on just, again, types of eye protection that are available. So for those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Jane Eustace. I'm the industrial hygienist at Workplace NL in the Prevention Services Department. And today is actually the kickoff of National Safety and Health Week. So I do want to welcome all of you who are attending because you're trying to get some educational opportunities kind of into your week. So again, this is part of our learning series, which is a program that we offer at Workplace NL to try to help increase education and awareness around different occupational health and safety topics, and we also do some stuff around return to work. So today's webinar is part of that series, but again, we are also trying to promote the Safety and Health Week, which is our national event this week. For those of you who are not familiar with Workplace NL, we currently serve about 215,000 workers and 18,000 employers in the province. We administer an employer-funded, no-fault insurance system for workplaces that also helps promote health and safety, return-to-work programs, obviously offer and compensation and things of that nature. So I'm, as I mentioned, part of the Prevention Services Department. This is a smaller department that's made up of a group of health and safety professionals. And again, our focus really is on education and awareness, and also providing some services like we can, provide employers with statistics, resources. We also do some training standards and things of that nature in the province. A couple of housekeeping items just before we get going. This presentation will probably take up the majority of the hour and a half we have allotted here. I do have a tendency to fill my time. I would encourage you guys as we're going along, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. I have a coworker behind the scenes who will kind of tabulate all those questions that you might have as we go. And at the end of the presentation, I'll look at those as a whole and see if there's anything there that I haven't already addressed. And we'll go over those. I will also put out my contact for information for anybody who wants to get in touch with me about something specific or something you just don't want to chat about through this software that we're using here today. There is a copy of this presentation as well in the handouts if you want it. It's a PDF version of the presentation that we're going to be going over today. So that'll be available until the webinar is over. At the end of the webinar, there will be a little survey that we ask that you fill out, which is really important for us for planning of our future events. And the only other thing I think is, micro breaks. We will take 2 short breaks at the half-hour and 1-hour mark. The purpose of these breaks are really just to give you a chance to get up out of your seat for a minute, move around a little bit. I will take you through a stretch, which I would encourage you guys to participate in if you feel healthy enough to do so. But certainly, again, the goal is to just kind of get you up, moving around a little bit. So whatever you can do is really fine for that. So for today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about risk factors for eye injuries. And we're going to try to link that up to specific types of eye protection and issues around eye protection. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to choose the right eye protection for a particular task. And there is a lot of places in here where I'm going to be saying eye and face protection. And that really has to do with the way that our regulations are written and some of the standards that we're going to look at today, which kind of deal with the eye and the face as one area. And then finally, at the end, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the requirements for emergency facilities around eye injuries, so specifically eye wash stations. I do find there's still a bit of confusion out there as to what is an acceptable emergency eye wash facility. So we'll get into that at the end. So just to get things going and kind of bring some attention to, why we chose this topic, eye injuries are really a very commonplace accident. We have about 250,000 injuries in Canada each year that are related to work. And about 1,000 of those, or a little, around 700, are happening per day. So we can imagine that Newfoundland being a smaller province, a small slice of those injuries are happening here in Newfoundland, Labrador. One of the big issues with eye injuries is we do find that the rates of injuries seem to be fairly consistent. So we don't see a lot of change. It's not uncommon, I think, for health and safety people to get a bit even frustrated talking about eye injuries and eye protection, because it seems to be just a constant battle, we'll say, at work to try to get workers to wear, we'll say, appropriate protection for the types of work that they're doing. But again, these are a very common source of injury, and not just in, say, construction industries. They're common across the board, really, in most industries, everything from retail to light duty cleaners to, I suppose, some of our more industrial settings like your manufacturing and your mining. So there are a ton of different potential injuries you could have to your eye, but I do want to talk about some of them in a bit of detail, just to, kind of get our heads around how these injuries occur before we get into, again, specific types of eye protection. So by no means is this meant to be a completely inclusive list. But some of the more common types of injuries would be things like blunt trauma, foreign objects in the eye, irritation and corrosion, which are similar, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Allergic reactions, which I think is one that's a little bit overlooked, and possibly this also true for infection. We've also got just standard abrasions and puncture injuries, injuries to the eye related to exposure to radiation, whether that is through sunlight or lasers or looking at a Welders Flash. There are potential effects on vision, including decrease in your nearsighted, farsightedness. So there can be actual things that affect our ability to see. There's also some chemicals out there that can affect your night vision or lead to other effects on the eye, blurred vision, spots, etc. Now, these are a lot less common. And generally speaking, the eye injuries that we have accepted as claims in the last 10 years or so within workplace NL, I don't believe there was any that actually resulted in blindness or loss of an actual eye. Majority were injuries that were treatable, we'll say. So eye injuries may be temporary, and a lot of our claims are for temporary issues, but they can also be permanent, and they don't necessarily have to be, if it is a permanent injury to the eye, it doesn't have to all happen at once. There are some chronic exposures that can slowly damage the eye over repeated exposure over time. And again, a good example of that would be something like damage to the cornea, which is the front of the eye, from exposure to UV light. So again, I want to talk about a few of these in a bit more detail. And again, this is not an inclusive list, so certainly there's a lot of gaps here that we'll end up with a little bit. So blunt trauma is usually the result of a worker being hit by something that you can see. So a large object like a tool or materials or something of that nature. These injuries typically are related to a fall, or they could be related to a dropped object. So this occurs when people are working above and materials or tools are dropped and they hit a person below. We do have a fair number of severe eye injuries that are related to transportation accidents, so car accidents and things of that nature. We have a few related to workplace violence, which is certainly a very hot topic the last few years. And occasionally you can have some major issues that are related to extremes of pressure. These injuries can be mild to severe, just depending on the amount of force that the eye is being contacted with. And they also typically involve symptoms that are unrelated to the eye. So symptoms that relate to the soft tissues around the eye, the bones even, so it could be fractures or things of that nature. Foreign bodies is probably our most common eye injury. This usually is the result of a flying or falling object, similar to blunt trauma. But the difference is that the item, the object, what is getting in your eye, is typically too small to see. So I got a picture there. Certainly we can see that little black dot just sort of on the edge of the iris there, but likely when that was floating around in the air or flying through the air, it was too small for the worker to see it. So we're talking about stuff like dusts, smoke, and fumes. And these foreign bodies can be particularly dangerous because they are so small. Sometimes they're unnoticed. It's not uncommon for people to get a little something in their eye and then sort of ignore it and maybe not rush off to the eye wash station or to a mirror to kind of have a look at what's going on there. But they might just try to carry on with their work. But these types of foreign bodies can lead to abrasions and scratching if they're left for a long period of time. They can also involve puncture type injuries, which means like little slivers and things that might actually penetrate the eye. It is conceivable that these could lead to blindness. Again, that would be a rare event and likely have to do with somebody delaying medical care after getting this type of an injury. Again, I wanted to touch on allergic reactions because I do think this one gets overlooked a lot. So this is the concept that we're not necessarily getting something in the eye, we're not getting, hit with something, but this is still a reaction of the eye, and often is an indicator to people in the workplace that there's something in the air that is maybe not offensive to everyone, but certainly to some sensitive individuals. So to clarify that a little bit, allergic reactions are not something that everyone will experience. Only certain people will develop the immune response, because really it is the immune system that decides when something that really is otherwise harmless is an allergen. So not all individuals will develop that immune response. So you may have, say, a body of workers, let's just say we have 100 people, there may be 10 or 15 that experience symptoms of an allergy if an allergic substance is in the work environment, but the rest of the workplace may not have any issues at all. And what's interesting with allergic reactions is for those people that have them, the more exposure they get to the substance, whatever it is, generally speaking, the worse the reactions become. Really, the key to managing allergies is to not be exposed to them. So these types of symptoms have a tendency to get worse and worse and worse. So it's important to keep an eye out for them. No pun intended there. Symptoms would include things like itching, sometimes burning. I have had people describe the light sensitivity, certainly. There can be certainly some redness is very common, and that watery kind of quality. There can also be some swelling, and I think this picture does the swelling justice. It is swelling to the eyeball itself, but it can also involve the soft tissues around the eye. I do have a lot of allergies myself, and I've experienced this particular eye reaction in the past. And again, generally speaking, only getting worse with more exposure. I also do want to mention that generally speaking, things that you can become allergic to, of which there is a wide variety of natural and man-made things, everything from perfumes to animal proteins to things like pollen, they can cause all kinds of other reactions as well. So things like skin reactions like dermatitis, sinus congestion or runny nose, and asthma are all examples of allergic reactions, but they all really come down to the same immune response. So again, it's that immune system deciding that they don't like this otherwise harmless substance. Yeah, so there's a lot of environments where we can see these types of reactions, and they're very common. I do find with our own claims, usually we don't have a source for these. Often it's what we call a non-specific allergic reaction where there's no real source identified. So it's important to investigate these types of events to sort of try to track down the culprit. Irritation and corrosion is another interesting one. So usually the types of substances that would cause irritation and corrosion are chemicals. So again, allergic reactions can be caused by things that are both natural and man-made, but usually irritation, we're talking about chemicals. So this could be a dust or a gas or a vapor, but usually when it gets into the eye, it reacts with the wet surface of the eye, and there's a chemical reaction there that causes irritation. And the symptoms really do look a lot like an allergic reaction from the perspective that you're going to have some redness and some watering. And depending on the type of irritant, you could also have that burning sensation and the sensitivity to light, etc. The difference is when these chemicals are particularly strong, the irritation becomes more of a corrosive effect. So you can actually potentially get something more along the lines of a chemical burn, which obviously would be a significantly more severe reaction, which could potentially cause blindness if certainly medical care wasn't sought immediately. And there are some, highly corrosive chemicals out there. I do want to just maybe make note of some of the little images that I have going on these slides. These two pictograms there in the red triangles are WHMIS symbols that represent hazards. So it's a good idea to check your safety data sheets, look for these types of hazard symbols, and then, find out specifically within that safety data sheet what the hazards are, whether it is to the eyes or the skin or what have you. But generally speaking, if you see that corrosive symbol down in the bottom right-hand corner, if it's corrosive to metals and the skin, it's going to be certainly also corrosive to the eye. And then finally, again, the last one that I think is maybe not talked about so much is infection. A lot of different things can cause infections. Certainly, fungi, bacteria, and viruses are the microorganisms that would be we'll say the root cause of that infection. But how people come into contact with these fungi, bacteria, and viruses is really key to how these infections are transmitted. Usually, in these cases, we have individuals that are coming into contact with someone who's carrying an illness. So it could be a person, like say in healthcare, or maybe in our criminal system. It also could involve contact with animals. There are a lot of diseases that can affect human beings as well as animals, and they can be spread amongst them. And there's also the potential to contact contaminated objects, so something that has fungi, bacteria, virus on it, and then sort of that hand to eye contact. And I'm sure a lot of this is familiar, maybe with for some of us with regards to COVID. You know, it certainly is an important thing. I think that a lot of us are learning this year about just how much we touch our face, and how that relates to the spread of that particular illness. So symptoms of an infection, again, are going to be similar to that allergic reaction we talked about earlier, the redness, the watery eyes. The big difference here is that usually there's going to be some type of a discharge. So rather than just that clear watery eye, you're going to have something that's a bit thicker, possibly colored. And again, that's kind of all an indicator that there's an infection going on in the body. And because this is an infection, there may again be additional symptoms such as fever. Fever is a very classic sign of an infection. And some other symptoms can be tied to nasal congestion. And part of that is because the eyes, the tear duct, which is sort of in the corner of the eye, does actually drain into the sinus cavity. So sometimes we get a lot of crossover between the sinuses and the eyes when it comes to symptoms. And then finally, I did want to talk a bit about Welders Flash. This one is a little bit specific compared to the remainder of the illnesses that we talked about already. But this is actually a really common claim that we have. We have I would argue that welders are probably one of our more common occupations with eye injuries. Certainly, they're not all Welders Flash cases, and there are a lot of claims that we have as well for non-welders who get this condition. But yeah, I felt like I really needed to touch on this one in this presentation. So Welders Flash, for those of you who aren't familiar, is caused by looking at the welding arc. So when someone is welding, there is a very bright light that's created where they're doing the weld. This arc is actually classified as a carcinogen. For the last few years now, it has been. So not just for the eye, but also for skin. It's not uncommon for welders, especially if they're not wearing appropriate PPE, to get severe burns of their skin from this Welders Flash. But it's more severe, we'll say, to have this injury affecting the eye. So usually what happens is either the welder inadvertently looks at the flash, like for example, maybe they drop their visor too quickly or too slowly, or someone else in the area who is not welding happens by the area where the weld is going on, where there's no protection in place for them. So usually screens or something is used around an area where there's welding going on, so that, again, people in the area don't accidentally happen upon it and look at it. One of the interesting things about Welders Flash is it usually takes a while to occur. And this can be the case for some of these eye injuries that we're chatting about, even the foreign bodies that we talked about earlier. Sometimes the moment it gets in your eye, or the moment your eyes, say, the beginning of the injury starts, it takes a bit of time for the pain, the discomfort, the symptoms to really get going. And this is true for Welders Flash. Usually it takes about 6 to 8 hours for the symptoms to really get bad. And we're talking about things like gritty feeling in the eye. That's a very common classic description. A really dry feeling eye. That sensitivity to light is usually quite extreme with Welders Flash. You can have people who are experiencing so much discomfort they don't want to open their eyes at all. So although they're not necessarily experiencing blindness, they are unable to use their eyes for a period of time. Usually at that point, if the pain is that severe, this individual is going to go seek medical care. But again, what's kind of interesting about this is that 6 to 8 hours after exposure could very well be when the worker is home or done for the weekend or what have you. So again, it's important that these issues are identified early on, or prevented even better before they occur, so that we don't have these kind of delayed illnesses coming in after the fact. Tying this into the radiation piece, because again, Welders Flash is an example of a type of radiation, again, that's created by the act of welding. I do want to also highlight, and this certainly shouldn't be too new for most of us, that the sun is also a source of radiation. The light that we see around us is a type of radiation. And long-term exposure to the sun, usually again repeated over many years of working outside or what have you, can result in the formation of cataracts. And according to the Academy of Ophthalmology, the worst possible thing you could do for your eyes as a person, as an individual, is to not wear sunglasses when you're outside. So I do want to just point out that even for those of us who are maybe not working in a high risk environment, maybe we're not, dealing with carriers of disease, or we're not a welder, or we're not working around dusts and particles that are flying around in our working environment. The sun is a major hazard to our eyes. And if nothing else, we can wear sunglasses when we're outdoors to protect our eyes from cataracts and from other conditions that can be caused by overexposure to the sun. Now, when choosing sunglasses, it is important that you pick something that actually has UV protection. You can just get tinted glasses that don't have UV protection. So it's important that when you're buying sunglasses, whether they're for work or for home, that you check to make sure that they have that UV protection included in them. And I'm just sorry, just bear with me for 1 second. I think I might be due for my next micro break. Okay, perfect. Let's get that going. So again, the purpose of these micro breaks is just to get you up out of your seat, get you moving around a little bit, if nothing else. So I am going to take you guys through a quick stretch. So I'll get you to just cross your fingers together and then put your palms sort of up above your head, reaching up towards the sky. And really what we're trying to do here is just kind of stretch out the upper back and shoulders. And I do want to just remind everyone that when you're stretching, you should feel a little bit of stretch, but you should not be feeling pain. Okay, I think we will keep going. And again, I just want to encourage you guys to, get up and move around and stretch if you need to throughout the PowerPoint. So moving on a little bit to talk about hazards and how these eye injuries occur. There are some particular hazards that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be trying to, again, link them back to the types of eye protection that are available. And again, looking really at the CSA standard in particular, that's going to be kind of the last portion of this. But some of the main hazards would include things like impact. So that would be impact from a flying or a falling object. And again, there's a variety of different PPE available to deal with that. You can also have hazards related to dusts, as well as things like splashes. So you might be using liquid chemicals. There are some industries that have exposure to sparks and slag, but in particular for this province, that is going to be the welding industry. We don't do much metal, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't have a forge here. That's not the word I'm looking for. A place where we make steel. Which would be certainly a hazard, but again, for sparks and slags, it's primarily welders and people that are doing cutting activities and things of that nature, metal fabrication, we'll say. We can also have vapors and gases that can be damaging to the eye. As we talked about earlier, there's a variety of different types of radiation that can be damaging. Sunlight, the welding arc, and I did actually mention lasers earlier, although we won't get into that into too much detail. There's also just general hazards around extremes of temperature, infectious materials, and I could even arguably put the wind down on that on some days, depending on, again, what you're doing. But certainly when you're out at sea, if you're fishing or something, the wind would be an example of another thing we want to protect our eyes from. So when we look at who are the high risk groups for these types of hazards, I did want to, again, bring to your attention a few groups. So men do seem to have a higher proportion of eye injuries than women. It's about 5 times. Now, I do want to highlight that this is based on our claims data, so it's only those claims that are submitted to us and accepted. So certainly there's some gaps there. And traditionally, there's probably more males working in industries where they would be exposed to flying or falling objects, things like mining. Now that is changing, certainly in this day and age, but historically that would have been a factor to consider. We also seem to have slightly higher rates of eye injuries for younger workers. Now, we would define young workers as, I think, workers from 16 to 24, but it's really this 20 to 30-year-old age group that seems to have significantly more eye injuries than the remainder. So it's not so much the teenage group, they're kind of cut off there. And also there seems to be a little bit of a dip in eye injuries once you get to about 60. If you're still working, your chances of having an eye injury seems to drop off. But this particular age group is at high risk. And if I had to hazard a guess, it's likely due to the fact that they're relatively young and new to their profession. It's possible that they're not as used to wearing PPE for their tasks. They may not be as aware of the hazards that are involved with their work. So often this age group requires a little bit of extra coaching and mentoring to make sure that they take the precautions that are necessary to do their job. Moving on to occupations, welders are our number one occupation that's listed as far as eye injuries are concerned. Again, some of that is Welders Flash, but a lot of the Welders Flash injuries are for non-welders who were simply walking by. The welders' eye injuries really have a lot of variation, from foreign bodies to that Welders Flash to other injuries, often involving chemicals or something that they might have accidentally got in their eye. The auto mechanics and technicians are very similar to the welders' injuries. They look similar. They have the same kind of proportions. And if I had to guess why, it's likely because auto mechanics do a little bit of welding and a little bit of everything, really. They do a bit of painting, a bit of sanding. So again, there's a lot of tasks going on that generate flying bits, whether it's spray paint or sanding of like the body of a car, or there could even be some again some welding activities going on. The next group we see there are the construction laborers. They always seem to be in my top 5 lists. I guess it's the nature of the little bit of everything that the laborers often do for construction. Then we've got the carpenters below that, and then finally the light duty cleaners, which I do think are a group that are maybe not as protected. I don't know if that's the right word I want to use. I feel like they're overlooked a lot at job sites. Often they are a third party, a contractor that's hired. But when you're on a site that has hazards that are not related to the cleaning activities, but related to the site itself, it's important to make sure that the light duty cleaners, whether they're hired or otherwise, subbed out, or otherwise, are aware of the types of hazards that they may come across when they're doing their work. I think I will leave it at that. Okay, so we'll move on, and I do want to just get into a little bit of hazard rec. So I did mention at the beginning of this presentation that my focus is going to be a bit on eye and face protection. So I do plan to go over the different classes of eye and face protection as they are kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? As they're classified by the CSA, that's the Canadian Standards Association. They had a new standard come out in 2020, I think. So that was last year. And there was some additions and things put into it. So that's kind of why I picked this presentation for NAOSH Week, was to kind of just, make you all aware of some of the improvements they've made to that standard. But before we get into just talking about just eye protection, I do want to talk a little bit about hazard rec, which is certainly a very important activity for all things that we do at our work. But I wanted to just kind of flip this a little bit, just to put a little bit of a focus on eye protection. So eye injuries, generally speaking, the ones that occur at work are preventable. Like pretty much 100% of them are. Again, it's a matter of, protecting the worker from that flying or falling particle, or, putting up screens or something to protect them from a UV or some other type of radiation. It's about putting controls in place in advance. And this is really important too, because the eye is a very sensitive part of the body, and we only have two. It is great that we have at least two, but certainly these are a very sensitive part of the body, and once they're damaged, it's hard to treat or get them back to the way they were before. So again, it's important to consider the eyes as a potential for a serious injury at the workplace. So, certainly step one is to identify your hazards. So this is the recognition piece. The next part of that is to determine how risky this particular task you're doing is going to be. So in relation to the eyes, like what is the most severe type of injury that could occur if all things went bad? And, what is the probability of this happening? Like, do you have a task where workers are regularly lifting and lowering their eye and face protection? Perhaps that is a flag for you to, a red flag to make you aware that maybe this particular task is extra dangerous. Certainly, if at all possible, where you have flying materials going around or splash hazards or what have you, if there's a way to eliminate that hazard, why not do that? There's been some really interesting and ingenious, really, things that I've seen employers do over the years to try to reduce some of these risks. For example, I've seen some employers switch the nature of the chemical that they were using, say from a liquid to a solid, or from a dusty solid to something more like a pellet. There are options out there to eliminate or at the very least to substitute the hazard that you have for something that's less hazardous. The next thing to try, of course, is to try to engineer or administrate that hazard until you can bring it down to a level that it's acceptable for work. So you might do things like put dust control methods in place, and there's a wide variety of different ventilation systems you can use to manage dust. There's also, again, a wide variety of procedural things, safe work procedures that you could have in place. I do find with safe work procedures, one of the, well, maybe this is a bit of a pet peeve for me, but one of the gaps I see a lot is that the procedure doesn't get specific enough when it comes to PPE. So you're going to say eye protection is required. Well, what kind of eye protection? Generally speaking, if workers are left up to make that decision on their own, they're going to go with just the standard safety glasses that they have on them. They're not necessarily going to go above and beyond that. And that's why I think it's important, for someone in a supervisory role to do these types of assessments to determine, again, if something with more coverage is required. So whether that's a goggle or face shield or some other control, again, it's good to deal with that stuff up front. And once you've kind of exhausted all the possible options to try to reduce the hazard, the last thing you should do is just put your workers in eye protection. And again, the main reason why that is considered the last option is because compliance can be an issue. A lot of workers don't love wearing PPE. There can be certain jobs that they do where they remove it when maybe that's the exact job they should never remove their PPE for. It doesn't get rid of the hazard effectively to summate. When you use PPE, the hazard is still there. You're just relying on a barrier to protect the worker from that hazard. And again, with PPE, with compliance issues and things of that nature, it's not something we want to just go straight to. There should be more thought process going into what else we can do before we rely on PPE. So I think I've talked enough about that. So whenever we're dealing with a hazard, we want to follow the hierarchy of controls. And I certainly have showed you guys this slide a few hundred times, I'm sure. But again, the goal should be to eliminate, and then following, in the reverse of effectiveness, moving our way down towards PPE again as that last possible option. PPE really should only be used when other controls are not available or not adequate, or as a short-term measure. So like if you're doing maintenance work or something along those lines where it's something that just kind of popped up and there's no real time to prepare, certainly that would be an acceptable means. And finally, during some kind of an emergency where you're, dealing with hazards that under emergency conditions, there just isn't the options to try to eliminate or engineer it out. Whenever PPE is used, workers are supposed to receive some training. I do find most employers deal with the PPE training as part of orientation, especially for really basic PPE like hard hats and boots and stuff like eye protection. But it can be important to just kind of refocus everyone on why eye protection is important on a regular basis, again, because these injuries still continue to happen. So some things to think about would be, why you chose this particular type of eye protection, any limitations, if there are any or I should say, if there is any complex component to the fit and wear of it. And same goes as well for inspection, cleaning, use, maintenance, and storage. That can be certainly very simple with a set of safety glasses, but for some of the eye and face protectors we're going to talk about, it can be a bit more complicated. And then finally, what to do in an emergency. So, what is it exactly this person should do if they do get something in their eye? Because keeping in mind, again, that PPE is the last line of defense. So you're basically saying that there's a hazard out there that you weren't able to control. So as a final option, you're going to put someone in PPE. If you're doing that, it's really important that they know what to do if the PPE doesn't work. So if for some reason they take it off, or if the hazard gets around that barrier, what are they supposed to do? And I do find this is, again, a part of training that is overlooked, and it's the whole concept of, how to use an eye wash station, where the eye wash stations are, if there's an alarm or anything other kind of aspect to the process that they're supposed to be aware of. Those are all really key points to include. And we're, again, going to talk more about emergency facilities sort of at the end of this PowerPoint. And then finally, before we move on and start talking about eye and face protection, I do want to talk a little bit about comfort and fit, in particular because these can be really important to compliance. A lot of the time when people don't want to wear their PPE,
It's usually, well, it's been my experience, it's because it's either uncomfortable, or it's in the way of some other piece of PPE that they have to use. So it's really important to not assume that one piece of PPE is going to work for everybody. You really want to set a minimum standard, sure, but provide some options if possible, or at least provide an environment where workers are not afraid to come up to a supervisor and say, hey, this eye protection doesn't mesh well with, say, a respirator that I'm wearing. Is there other options out there for me that might be more comfortable? Again, because the person may be more likely to wear said PPE. So there's a couple of things that kind of bringing the worker into the process of selecting can help with. It can help increase awareness of the hazard. Again, it can improve fit and comfort if they're involved. It can motivate workers to use their PPE because they were part of the process. But generally speaking, what we're talking about here is the buy-in. They're more likely to buy into a procedure or a practice if they've had the opportunity to be involved with it. I do want to, or moving into, again, some other elements of training. The inspection, cleaning, use, maintenance, and storage is an important part for eye protection. Again, it seems simple, certainly when we're talking about safety glasses, it's to a certain extent it is, but it gets more complex for some of the more advanced pieces of eye and face protection we're going to talk about. But generally speaking, you're looking for things like scratches and dents that would impair your vision, as well as any kinds of pitting or cracks. Because pitting it really is a symptom of chemical exposure. These types of damage kind of imply that there may be a weak point in the material that's used for the lens. So usually if you see any of these types of signs of damage, the lens really should be replaced, because it may not be able to withstand the impact or what have you that particular piece of eye and face protection is meant to cover. And then generally speaking, you're just wanting to store these in a clean, dry location. You are putting these on your face, so it is a good idea to keep them somewhere that's clean. I've worked in a lot of really dirty environments over the year, and I always kept a clean pocket. So if I had, say, a safety vest on, one pocket, I'd have anything that was kind of dirty in it, like maybe my gloves and whatnot, and then anything that I was trying to keep relatively clean, I would keep in the other pocket. I do find a lot of workers just carry these around in their pocket, and they can get very scratched up and dirty. And it's pretty rare to see them, taking them out of their pocket and cleaning them before they put them on their face. But certainly, it is a good idea to clean your glasses before you wear them. Okay, so let's get into eye and face protection. This is really kind of the guts of this presentation. Again, I want to go over the updates to the CSA standard, and we'll chat a little bit about, again, when a particular type of eye and face protection is appropriate. And then again, we'll finish this presentation off by talking a little bit about eye wash stations. So we do have some legislation, obviously, around eye and face protectors. Basically, our legislation requires us to follow whatever is the newest version of CSA ZAD 94.3. So I do have -20 in there just because that is the latest one that just recently came out. But the way our legislation is written, we're supposed to follow whatever the newest one is. So that is a bit tricky, I know, in the province. I've had trouble with this one myself over the years. Sometimes we get out of date with stuff. It's a good practice to kind of jump onto the CSA every year or two and just kind of see what's new. I'm also a big fan of referencing the specific standard I used when I'm developing, say, programs or anything specific. So I'll know then if it gets outdated. So I do want to talk a little bit about glasses and contact lenses. Generally speaking, you're not allowed to wear regular glasses in place of safety glasses. They just don't have the ability to protect your eyes. They're not rated for impact or splash or anything else. So if you do need to wear regular prescription lenses, of which I am one of those people, I do wear glasses, you've got to wear them underneath something else that's got that impact rating. So often these are referred to as over the glasses or OTG. And I'm probably going to use that term OTG a couple of times in this section. So these are just glasses or goggles that fit right over top of your existing prescription lenses. And I'm not going to get into that bottom part because that's particular. Now, as it relates to contact lenses, there are a variety of chemicals and hazards out there for which wearing contact lenses is not recommended or is actually prohibited. This is, again, a little piece of the hazard assessment that I often see not done, but it is a nice well, I wouldn't say extra. It's a nice thing to include when you're assessing a hazard, in particular an eye hazard, whether or not contact lenses are okay to be worn. There are certain activities for which the CSA standards and the like that we're going to be chatting about specifically say you cannot wear contact lenses. One example is welding. It's not in the CSA standard that I previously just showed. That's this one here, CSA ZAD 94.3. But within the CSA standard for welding, which I believe is W, starts with a W. Let's leave it at that. They specifically say that you cannot wear contact lenses while doing any type of welding activity. So again, it's important to know these kind of really important prohibitions to make sure that your workers are protected. Okay, so within the CSA standard, there are 7 classes of eye and face protection. This hasn't changed since the last revision. There were 7 before, there's still 7. What they've done, though, is they've added in some little subcategories kind of under some of these to deal with some additional hazards that weren't included. So we're going to talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. So class 1 is your safety glasses. So these either offer you partial or total protection from impact. It depends on how much coverage they provide. They may include protection from radiation or not. So they may have that UV, or they could be designed for laser protection. There's again a variety of types of radiation that may be covered under some of these. Generally speaking, when you're looking at a set of safety glasses, most of them are pretty similar. You're going to have these stems that kind of go over your ear. There's going to be a lens in the front, usually 2, but there can be just one big mono lens. And again, there are some options out there for OTG, like the picture in the bottom right-hand corner. Those safety glasses are designed to be worn over regular glasses. And there's a lot of accessories out there, too, that you can get with your safety glasses. In the last few years, a lot of people have been buying these foam gasket-type safety glasses. So they kind of have something that kind of sits along on the skin, almost creating a bit of a seal. I do find at the workplaces where these were rolled out, it was with the best intentions, certainly. You know, they do have a little bit of extra protection from dusts, really. That's kind of what that foam is meant to do, is kind of again create more of a seal around the face so that little particles and dust can't get in. But I do find a lot of workers cut the foam off those glasses usually, or one of the more common reasons I've been told is that it affects their peripheral vision. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I have worn them myself, and I didn't find them to be very problematic. With regards to safety glasses, they can come in all kinds of colors. And I did want to talk a little bit about that. Not going into too much detail. In most cases, we should be wearing clear safety glasses. Those are the types of safety glasses that are really designed to be used indoors. So if you're working inside, the clear ones are the way to go. You can also get gray or black. These are your standard tinted safety glasses. They're really meant for protection from UV light. So these are the ones you would wear if you're working outdoors. We are going to talk about what's required for welding flash later, and it's more than just a bit of UV protection on a tint. Excuse me, but certainly they're a good way to go when you're working outside. You can also get the self-tinting type. These are the ones that actually change tint as you enter or exit into a space. I'm not sure about these yet. I think a lot of people aren't. There are some sites that I know of that have banned these, and the reason really is because when you go from outside to inside, it takes a bit of time for the tinting to change. Now that time is decreasing as technology is getting better, but there is sort of a small window, I guess, where somebody may have too much tint. So I do know some sites who just don't allow those, and lots of sites too that don't allow people to wear the gray or the black ones indoors. Although it is not uncommon to see someone dodge inside with their tinted glasses on. You can also get silver or mirrored safety glasses. They kind of have a purpose, which is really to reflect light. So if you're working in an area that has really high reflection, like say if you're working on the water, really that's kind of what they're designed for. The amber safety glasses are meant for low light conditions. They kind of help with color vision and help make things a bit more crisp. So say, for example, if you were working at dusk outside, these would be beneficial. And then we've got the polarized ones, which kind of have a bit of a mirrored look to them as well. Sometimes I find people get kind of confused between those mirrory looking ones and the polarized ones. Again, they have specific purposes. It's pretty rare to see people needing the polarized ones really in the workplace, but they have their purposes. Again, all these options are out there. The key is to provide your workers with what they need specifically for their tasks. So usually what I see people doing is they'll keep a good stock of the clear ones available, and then some of the gray ones as well for those individuals that are, again, working outdoors. Anti-fog is something that I get asked about a lot, especially since COVID has come up. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit. It is probably a good idea to get safety glasses that have some type of anti-fog coating on them, like that's part of the design of the glasses. That being said, you're still going to get fogging. Fogging, it seems to be a bit of a impossible issue to deal with. I know I've worn a lot of full face shields in really hot and really cold environments with varying amounts of humidity, and it's kind of it works for a little while is the best way I would describe it, but it doesn't last forever. So I wanted to talk about just some of the options. So you can get things called surfactants, fancy term for soap. Basically what this does is it creates a little bit of a film on the glass. So as moisture from your skin and breathing and things like that build up inside the glasses and create that sort of hot to cold temperature differential across the lens. Instead of having little droplets forming on the glasses, which is kind of what fog looks like, they spread out and they form this even layer. And again, typically speaking, that is going to make it easier for you to see through those lenses for a period of time until the surfactant dries up. And that's really kind of what happens. It starts to dry up and you start to get droplets forming again.
So it's something that you have to apply over and over again. There's also all kinds of other things that you can add. Usually these are what we call hydrophilic substances, so they repel water. They don't like water. So these would be things like gels and waxes, and as well, and this is maybe a bit of a newer term, nanoparticles. So these are particles that we make. They're man-made particles, and a lot of them are hydrophilic. They don't like water, so they will actually force the water away. These would likely last longer than a surfactant, but like anything else, they will eventually wear out. So it might be something that you have to have reapplied, or it may just be that the particular piece of PPE has to be replaced. So before we move into goggles, I'm going to have our second micro break. So again, the purpose of this is just to get up and move around a bit, get the blood flowing, give your back a chance to, you know, reset from being sat in an office chair all morning, if that's what you're doing. So get up, move around. I'm going to take you through another quick stretch. So again, upper back and shoulders is kind of my gig for this type of a webinar. So I'll get you to reach your right arm across the left side of your body, and kind of use your left arm to support that right arm at the elbow. We're trying to stretch out the shoulder joint a little bit. And again, this shouldn't be painful, just to the point of stretch. And just kind of hold it there for a minute. Looking forward is a good idea. And then we're going to do the very same thing with the other arm. So we're going to reach the left arm across our body, hold it with the right arm. And again, just get a little bit of stretch in the shoulder joints without, you know, moving to the point of pain. Perfect. Okay, feeling relaxed. Okay, so class 2 are your goggles. So these are meant to protect workers from impact, splash, and particles that are flying around. Generally speaking, your goggles are going to provide more protection than safety glasses because they have that seal where they sit on the face, depending on the style. So, you know, across the brow and under the eyes. There are a couple of different types, and I did want to mention these because I do occasionally get questions about this. You can get vented or non-vented goggles. Now, the vast majority of the goggles that you're going to see at a supplier are going to be vented. They're just much more common. They're less expensive as well. So these types of goggles have venting usually up at the top. So you can kind of see it in this picture I have on the very far left-hand side. There's like these little white dots going along the top of the goggle. Those would actually be little vents. Usually they're at an angle to kind of discourage dust and things from getting in through the vents. But the purpose of those is to let out steam from the heat, again, that's produced by your glasses or goggles being tight to your face. So it's meant to kind of help with fogging. But there are some situations where having a vent is not sufficient, that you actually need the non-vented type because usually that would implicate that you have a vapor, like from a liquid or a gas, that is irritating or corrosive to the eye. So it has that potential to get in to the area around the eye and have a reaction again with the liquid in the eye itself. So there are some specific chemical applications where you would need to use non-vented goggles. I'm not a big fan of them because they immediately fog up. Personal opinion is that if you need a non-vented system, you're better off getting a powered air respirator that has basically a breeze that is made inside the face piece that prevents it from fogging. And I am going to talk about face pieces. That is class 7, so we're going to get to that. But yeah, I'm not a big lover of the non-vented goggles. I just, comfort-wise, practicality, if you're wearing them all day, there's other, we'll say, more comfortable, more practical options, but generally speaking, they're more expensive. Oh, and sorry, within the safety goggle world, you can also get both of these types, the vented and the non-vented, with radiation protection if desired. Also within the safety goggles, we've got a couple of additions. So we do have a new class for the laser protective goggles. These have been around for years, laser protective goggles. Usually they're kind of an orangey color, although don't quote me on that because I haven't done much with lasers in my career. But lasers have different classes. I believe there's 4 classes, including 0, so that would make 5. And certain classes of laser require laser protective glasses of some type, whether it's, again, a glass, a goggle, a face shield, or what have you. And another new addition here is Class E, which is, again, brand new to the standard, electric arc protection. They just added this. This is quite awesome. Currently, there's no real specific regulations, we'll say, in the province for protection from electric arc, other than just arc flash protection. Usually, say, for example, electricians would wear a face shield, not so much a goggle. So I've never seen a 2E in use. Again, it's a new thing, but I guess there must be some applications where an electrician would have an arc flash hazard where these would be appropriate instead of using a face shield, again, which is more common. And I think I have a picture of the face shields that they typically use further along, so I'll show you that now shortly. Class 3 is all your welding helmets, and Class 4 is actually welding hand shields. So really, Class 3 and 4 are both around welding. So these protect from impact, heat, because there's quite a lot of heat produced by welding, and again, there's a lot of sparks and slag, which is molten metal that kind of flies around when you're doing welding activities. We've also got, again, the radiation from the arc, and potentially some hazards of electricity, which really comes from the welding machine itself. So these are helmets. They cover the entire head. They're opaque to light, so when you put one of these things on, if you're not welding, you're inside a cave. I have worn this stuff, just, obviously not to, I'm not a welder. I have done a weld just for kind of just to see what it was all about, we'll say. But, I put on the gear and whatnot. It's basically impossible to see out of these welding helmets, and I really do feel like the welders definitely have a very specialized set of skills. But some of the activities they might do while using a welding helmet would include welding itself, which is what I've got in that little image that's going there on the right. Gouging, which is kind of a cutting activity that uses a welding machine. Plasma arc cutting, those are those big cutting tables that use a plasma arc. And I do want to just mention that we have a couple of claims for people with eye injuries related to plasma arc cutting, which was a bit of a surprise to me. And then finally, just standard oxy-fuel cutting. So it could be oxyacetylene, oxypropane. These are all considered as welding activities within the welding CSA standard. So again, you usually have this, helmet which covers up the head. It may be attached to a hard hat, or can be its own helmet, which is, again, a full piece. Usually there's a part in the front that allows the welder to remove the radiation protection and look out through just an impact protected window. And then, there's the ability for them to open and close that, or lift and lower their shield. So welders do have the potential to have injuries just based on removing the shield too soon, or not putting it on soon enough. And unfortunately, occasionally we do get a claim around that. The hand shield is similar to a helmet, only the worker actually holds it in place. So that kind of, I don't know what I would call that, sort of pole sticking out the bottom where the chin would be. You're meant to hold that with your hand, with a gloved hand, just holding it in place to do a quick weld. These are CSA approved, but again, it's been my experience that on a lot of sites, they don't allow these. I would assume the reason why, because I haven't really been involved with, you know, an assessment where we've decided, you know, this type of PPE is not going to be allowed on this particular site. I haven't been involved with that, but I would assume it has to do with how easily you can pull the whole system away, and really kind of allowing some potential for people again to make some mistakes. With regards to welding, the shade that goes in the eyepiece area is really important. There are specific shade requirements for different types of activities, and again, they're all in the CSA standard for welding, which again starts with a W. I really think it's 117. I think I'm gonna have to look that one up. But yeah, they list the different types of welding activities on the left here, and then they have the amperage, so kind of how much power your welding machine is being fed, kind of running across the top, and then all the shade requirements are kind of within the box. So for example, if I was doing stick welding, which is the most common, also known as SMAW, I would need a shade between a 7 and an 11, depending on the amperage that I'm using. If I was doing using a plasma cutter, I want something between an 8 and a 10. So again, it's all kind of laid out for you. What's important is that you go look at the standard and make sure that your workers are using these things correctly. Again, these standards get updated regularly, so sometimes things will change, and you know, when you're leaving it up to the welder to decide what shade they want to use, sometimes it's a good idea to double check to make sure that they're working with at least within these parameters, because sometimes, you know, certainly mistakes can be made. Yeah, so again, it's all very clearly laid out again in the welding and allied processes standard, which is also a regulated standard here in Newfoundland and Labrador, so it is enforceable. So again, getting into the welders and helmets and hand shields, for those individuals who are working near welding activities, but they're not necessarily the welder, they should either have the exact same protection on as the welder, i.e. they should be wearing a helmet, or they should be protected by a screen. So I have a picture here of somebody providing fire watch. So we've got an individual on the left who's providing fire watch for someone who's doing some welding activities. Now at the moment, they're just using a torch to heat up a piece of steel. But certainly, you know, we got the welding in progress sign going there. So we're gonna assume that there's no one else in the shop who has the potential to accidentally come across that piece of pipe he's welding. But if that area was open and there was people coming and going, we would want to surround that work area with welding screens. Most of the ones I see around are very similar to that green screen I've got on the right hand side there. It's just a little mobile like a partition that you just move around wherever your welding is going on. Some places like to use curtains, which are a little bit better as far as not having as many gaps between screens. But you know, certainly there's lots of options available. So to protect the worker's eyes when they're not welding, so when they again lift and lower their shield, which generally speaking is how welding is done, you know, they do a ton of preparatory work, grinding and all kinds of stuff, then they, you know, might spend 20 minutes welding, and then they've got to clean the space. So there's a lot of up and down. Again, they really can't see much of anything out of that that shield when it's down, unless, you know, they're welding. They can see the flash to a certain extent. So they have to lift it and lower it. So within, again, that CSA standard for welding, they specifically say that they need to wear safety glasses underneath the face shield. Or you can get types of welding helmets nowadays that have like where this the picture of the guy I've got here on the right has the whole shield lifted. You can just lift the tinted portion only and still have an impact resistant face shield in place. I might have a picture of that. If I do, I'll certainly point it out. And again, as I mentioned earlier, You're not supposed to wear contacts with when you're doing welding, and the main reason is because foreign bodies, so little bits of dust and fume from the smoke, can get underneath the lens and can cause abrasion over time. So certainly it depends on the nature of your work, whether that might end up causing a major problem for you. But if you're welding all day, certainly that is something you would not want to have is contact lenses, because again, you may end up with really severe irritation by the end of the shift that may have started in the morning and you didn't even know that it was going on throughout your day. The next class is number 5. These are the loose fitting helmets. I'm not going to talk about these in much detail because there are very few workplaces that I'm aware of that use these. These do provide eye and face protection, again, similar to any kind of hood. But there's a bunch of different classes depending on the specifics of what hazard you're dealing with. So you may have the impact type. There is one specific type that's designed for dust and splashes. There's a radiation type, high heat type, and those high heat types are usually like a silvery color. They're kind of like reflective, kind of like tinfoil. And again, we've got the new electric arc protection. That's the Class C type, which again is a brand new type. Then moving into face shields, which are much more commonly used. So again, I'd rather just spend more time talking about those. Eye and face protection comes in a couple of different types. Again, we've got our impact and splash. We've got radiation protection, which again would be tinted usually. High heat applications, which again has that foil look to it. And the new one, the electrical arc protection. These are all really important. They all have their place. I guess what I really want to say about face shields is maybe they're not used as much as they should be. We get a lot of eye injury claims where the individual was wearing eye protection, but the eye protection was not sufficient to cover enough of the eye or the face to protect from the specific hazards that they had. Face shields really should be mandatory for any type of work that creates a flying or falling particle, any type of work that includes splash hazards. I do want to point out that since COVID started, there is a lot of other types of face shields out there that are being used for droplet protection, but these are not necessarily CSA approved. So it's really important if you have, say, for example, a hazard of impact, that you don't use one of these non-CSA approved face shields. You really want to make sure you're using the right gear for that, because those are, again, just designed to catch droplets, which certainly wouldn't meet the definition of an impact. When using a face shield, generally speaking, you're going to want to wear it in conjunction with safety glasses in most cases. And again, the reason why is because people are lifting and while wearing the face shield throughout the day. For things like oxy-fuel cutting, because I do find this is often, again, overlooked, there is actually a shade requirement that, again, comes from that welding standard that we looked at earlier. I do often see people doing oxy-fuel cutting in just a clear shade, but they recommend a minimum of a shade 4 for this type of work. So maybe that's a little tidbit for somebody who's in attendance. For the arc flash shields, again, usually it's a face shield. So really the one on the far left, that's what we see typically. It's a face shield that attaches to a Class E hard hat that's designed for electrical resistance. It often has a yellowy tint and it covers up the chin. So there's kind of like an under portion to this face shield. It's there to protect from the extreme heat of an arc flash if it was to occur. There are 5 levels of arc flash gear. Again, I think they start at 0 and go to 4. I don't know why organizations do that. But certain levels you would need an even more advanced, we'll say, shield, which is moving into this second middle item where you've got a guy more so in a hood with a little bit more advanced arc flash outfit on.
So again, face shields used for protection from respiratory droplets would typically not have a CSA approval on them. If they are being used in healthcare, it's possible that they need to meet other standards, such as the ASTM, which is a common standard that's used for medical devices. But again, if people are just using this for general COVID protections outside of healthcare, these would not have the ability to protect you from anything other than respiratory droplets. So I just wanted to point that out. And then again, going back to my little spiel on face shields, again, there's a lot of situations where you just need more coverage. So it's really important to look at potential for people to get stuff up and around regular safety glasses. And that's when you're going to start looking at, maybe a vented goggle. And if the face is still at risk, you're moving on to something like a face shield. And then finally, I did say that I was going to talk a little bit about respiratory face pieces. So this is class 7. So full face respirators, like this picture I've got on the far left, they're not uncommon in many industries. And generally speaking, they're used because there's an eye and face hazard that goes along with a respiratory hazard. So you're kind of just doing it all in one shot rather than having a half face mask with safety glasses. You just go with the full face and it has it all in place. These can vary a lot in design depending on who the maker is, but you can get impact, splash, radiation protection. There is a category that are loose fitting that would not require a fit test. Fit testing for respirators is only required for tight fitting apparatus. So sometimes this is convenient for some employers. And that also comes in the type, the loose fitting with radiation protection. So some examples of when you might want a respiratory face piece would include things like welding, spray painting, especially if you're doing a lot of it, and sandblasting or any other type of abrasive blasting. In particular, I'm a big fan of the powered air respirators for these activities. Again, these are the respirators that actually push air into the helmet that the person's wearing, so that they don't get fogging. Fogging is a racket, and again, it can be very difficult in certain environments, temperatures in particular. I don't think I've ever found anything work better than powered air to keep fogging down. So just to give some examples, the one on the far left there is a welder's mask that has a respirator built into it. It's all in one, so it's all one thing. He can lift up the outer face shield, and he still has another face shield down below that can protect his eyes when he's doing things like grinding. The guy in the middle there is wearing a loose fitting hood, specifically designed for spray painting. So we're assuming the paint he's using has some toxic fumes in it you wouldn't want to breathe in, but it's also keeping him from getting that toxic paint all over his person or in his eyes. And again, we have our blasting helmet on the right, which is certainly an extremely abrasive material, thus the name abrasive blasting. So certainly there's some seriously intense eye protection required for that. And I do want to just point out that all these activities wear and tear on PPE, and you need to make sure again that the PPE stays in half sensible condition. It's not much good to be doing spray painting out of a window that you can't see through because it's covered in paint. Briefly, just to touch on inserts, there are some options out there for people who have glasses. I don't like any of them personally. I've yet to find, because again, I wear glasses, any type of insert that is good, that is comfortable for all day use inside a full face. You can get prescription face, prescription shields, but again, very expensive. And again, if you need impact and whatnot, that can be very tricky. Disposable face covers is another nice little add-on. So these are often used when people are doing painting. It's like a little plastic sticker that goes over the lens, and when you're done with your painting, you just pull the sticker off and throw it away, so you don't have to throw away your whole mask. Okay, so I'm getting really tight on my time here. I only have a few minutes. I doubt I'm going to be able to talk about eye wash stations in the amount of detail as I wanted, but I'm just going to try to fly through a few things here. So generally speaking, if you need to put on eye protection, you need an eye wash facility. Certainly check your safety data sheets. Those are a really good resource to determine whether you need an eye wash or not. But if someone has the potential to get something in their eye, whether it's a chemical or a dust, they should have some type of access to an eye wash facility. Again, check your safety data sheets. They'll give you some direction as to what you might need. There's three kind of main types of eye wash facilities. There's the plumbed in type. So these ones are actually hooked right up into your plumbing. Personally, I like those the best because I find they're the most fail safe. Like they're less likely to get modified, we'll say. The one in the middle there, the faucet mounted type, I find sometimes you'll go into an area that has one of those and it's been removed, maybe because somebody needed to use the sink for something else, but that's again another acceptable option. And then finally you have the self-contained type where you're actually providing a reservoir of liquid that's acceptable to use on the eyes. A couple of just highlights here. You can also get shower facilities that have the eye wash station built right into it. Certainly it's important to look at both things when you're looking at emergency equipment. Look at both the showers and the eye wash. It is very important for these systems to be maintained properly. And they need to work in the event of an emergency. These little eye wash bottles are not satisfactory to meet the requirement for an eye wash facility on their own. These are really only meant to be used for travel to an actual eye wash station. So you might have a piece of work that's going on a little bit at a distance from your eye wash. So you give the person this to use, again, en route. And the main reason why is it cannot provide 15 minutes of continuous flushing. And you can only do one eye at a time. Eye wash stations at safety showers do have to meet a requirement, and it's this ANSI requirement right here. There's also a little guidance document on the Service NL's website that talks about some of the specifics that I'm not going to have time to get into. But they include things around installation, how far they're meant to be from the hazard, things around, whether or not you're allowed to have stairs or ramps, signage required for emergency eye wash stations. Again, there are requirements for how they're activated and how much water they provide. Generally speaking, 15 minutes is the minimum, but a lot of data sheets these days say 60 minutes. Flushing fluid has to be at the right temperature and pressure. These devices need to be protected from dirt and contamination and tampering. So again, there's a lot of maintenance involved. Generally speaking, and I don't see a lot of people doing this, they're supposed to be activated at least once a week to make sure that the thing is going to work. And there are some workplaces out there who do that every day. In the morning before they start their job, they'll check it. But these are usually very high-risk places. But generally, again, what was required by that standard is a weekly test, and you're supposed to keep track of those activations and keep good records of what you're doing in-house. For those of you who do use the eye wash bottles, watch out for expiry. Any kind of self-contained system is going to have an expiry date on that fluid, so it's going to have to be replaced regularly. Again, that's kind of why the potable plumbed in systems are a little bit more convenient. You don't have to do as much maintenance on the flushing fluid. But keep track of who's in charge of that when they're doing their checks. To summarize, and again, I apologize for kind of flying through my last slides there. Eye injuries are 100% preventable. For employers, it's really important to make sure you're doing risk assessments that include eye hazards, and make sure that you're being specific about the types of protection that you're going to suggest your workers wear. If you're leaving it up to them to make up their own minds, be prepared for them to choose less than is required for the hazard. And then for workers, I just wanted to say that, you really get one set of eyes and that's it. So, when in doubt and you have no other way to kind of protect yourselves from these hazards that you come across, wear your eye protection, certainly. Okay, I'm going to open this up for questions. Again, I apologize. I'm pretty much going over my time here at this point. Again, I want to thank you all for attending. We've got a lot of webinars this week because it is Safety and Health Week. Again, if you want to reach out to me, maybe the best thing to do is just to get in touch with me through email, or you can call me. And again, there will be a feedback form that's coming your way once you close out of the webinar. And just to give you a couple of things that we've got coming up, there is another presentation this week on considerations for selecting PPE if you want to kind of keep this PPE conversation going. And next week, or sorry, on May 26th, that is a typo, I will be doing another session on noise and hearing loss. Again, that's towards the end of the month. That's my bad. Sorry, that's my own typo there. Okay, thanks everyone for attending again. Happy to see you all. Hope you get the opportunity to attend some of the Safety and Health Week presentations.